want us to think back to a time where somebody said that you never told them that thing, that important thing. Many of us maybe have small children at home, and we can remember telling them, go clean your room, go do your homework, and they swear you never told them this. We remember saying it, right? And there's a lot of reasons for this, and it largely comes down to systemic thinking and how we are not paying attention to what's being said, because there's these other elements of our life that's coming into the process. And if we were to think about maybe the child's at fault or the other person's at fault because they weren't paying attention, but here's the thing, we are equally as at fault there because we're not listening to the process. We're not paying attention to the other things that the child is doing, the things that are important to our clients, to the other things that they're doing. Many of us are educators in the room, and this is the time of the semester where grades are due, and undoubtedly this week is probably when final grades are coming. Raise your hand. Somebody said, you never told me that. And your response is, it was on the syllabus, right? Every single time. That's the response back. But the thing is, they didn't hear us say it on the first day of class. They didn't hear us say it last week. And same with our clients, because they were looking at their phone and we didn't notice that they were looking at their phone. They just got pulled over for speeding on the way to your office, and we didn't notice that. And so we are equally at fault when the person says, you never told me that. When we're certain that we told them, we can't just put it all on them for not listening. It's this collaboration and us paying attention to, is what I'm saying actually being heard? We are the active component of that. And this is really the basis of all things systemic thinking and the systemic approach, is that once we start thinking about the other elements that are at play in a situation, we automatically start thinking therapeutically. This does not mean that we are therapists. You heard that I am in fact a licensed marriage and family therapist, but I don't want us to be therapists, but we can communicate therapeutically. And the way that we communicate therapeutically is not so different than the way that we communicate with our significant other, with our friends, with the people that we care about. It's this communication to where I am actively involved in that part of the communication. And that's what I want to show you about. I'm going to walk away, and I'm not sure if this mic is working or not. We'll find out. Oh, it's not. Oh, but he's going to fix it. That way I can walk around a minute. Okay, there's a lot of really interesting research as it relates to communication. We've all heard the benefits of active listening and what that means. And here's some of it in real life. So when we think about active listening, consider that the brain is using 1/3 of its processing capabilities to listen to even the fastest communicator, the fastest talker. So this particular study was comparing it to a New York City talker. Okay, so you can use that. Or another example of a fast talker. And when we're listening to and trying to comprehend what that person is saying so quickly, that's using about 1/3 of our brain processing. We all know that communication is about 7% of the words that are being said. We know nonverbal communication is another big component. So theoretically, 2/3 of our brain is available, even listening to the fastest talker, to be looking for the process. For what are they looking at? What are they thinking about? What's their body language? We have the capability to do that. Do we? No. Most of the time we don't. We are instead using that other 2/3 part of our body to think about, oh, what did I get that's making my stomach hurt? Or what am I having for dinner tonight? Or I wonder if my clothes are accurate for tomorrow, or what's the activity I've got to get everybody shoveled to this evening? And we're thinking about those other things. So when we're putting our brain processing power into these other non-things in front of us, I'm missing a huge portion of the communication that's happening. This was so fascinating. Some of you are my friends on LinkedIn, and you saw me post about this study. This is not my research, but it's so fascinating to think about this particular study to where they looked at first and second graders, and they asked them to recall what their teacher had said just in normal instruction, just minutes prior. And 90% of the first and second graders were able to correctly recite back what the teacher had just said. By junior high, only 44% of the people, the students, the junior hires, could correctly recall what their teacher just said. By high school, only 25% of high schoolers can recall what their teacher just said minutes before. And so then one of my former PhD students commented, well, what about PhD students? What's it like with men? For sure, under 1%. And the reason why is because we are using this, our brain gets bigger as we age, so the capacity grows, but the reality is we're not using our brain capacity for listening. We're starting using our brain capacity to solve all of these other really great problems. And so as our brains get bigger, we're actually focusing less on the words that are being said and the communication that's happening. Other study, not my research, but such a fascinating study, looked at people's ability to conduct these cognitive tests. So some memory tests and also like some equations and just general problem solving capabilities. And they had people in different groups. In one of the groups, they were just told to complete these tasks. And the other group, they put a phone in the room and they said, it's possible that this phone might ring during your activities. You can just ignore it, you can answer it, you can do whatever you want, but I'm just gonna leave this phone here. And those people with the phone in the room, it wasn't even their phone, but just the possibility that that phone might ring diminished their capability on those cognitive tests by 20%. That's a pretty significant amount to think about. So we know we have problems concentrating on what's being said, which is a huge piece of the systemic thinking approach. But what in the world are we supposed to do? People say, oh, you just need to engage in more active listening. But what does that mean and how do we do it? And if you don't have to be a therapist to do any of these three things, these are really great pieces of advice from the Psychology Today magazine, which is very much written for the average consumer. So if you're interested in this stuff, you should look at this magazine. And the three things, there are three big takeaways for really incorporating these skills into everyday life was to simply repeat back what somebody says and then add on with a question or a statement or some sort of emotional tag to it. So that sounds like it was really hard that your dog just died. I had the really amazing opportunity to visit the Pentagon yesterday and meet with some pretty high-level officers. And one of them, who you would never expect given his position, was talking about his dog dying and how this was such a major event and how he had to, somebody called from work right after they left the vet's office and he said, you know what, I'm just gonna have to call you back later because I can't deal with this right now. Can you imagine that? Like this really powerful person is so impacted by the death of a dog. It's just a dog, but yet this is a very important piece of his life and to be able to react to that in a sensitive way and add on, yeah, that dog really is like a part of your life. It's been with you through major transitions and to add on that. And then to approach it with you as the student, and this is hard because by definition, financial advisors should advise. We should be the expert role. And so to be able to take the step back and to allow yourself to be taught something from the client, going in knowing that guaranteed whoever you're having a conversation with knows something that you don't know is so powerful. And to take that student role is a way to gather some of this information and get that systemic thinking going. And then in this article, they recommended going into a reporter mode, which I thought was a fun thing to think about of reporters when we see them on TV. They never ask yes and no questions. Rarely do they ask yes and no questions. It's very open-ended questions, and their job is not to be the talker. Their job is to get the other person to do the talking. And so if we can think in our minds, okay, I just need to be a reporter right now and gather as much information as I can from this client. It's a quick and easy way to think about systemic thinking and systemic communication. So throughout the rest of the conversation, we're gonna kind of go through three main areas. One, obviously, there's a value in systemic thinking, or I wouldn't be here. And number two, thinking about this idea of differentiation of self and looking around the room. I know that several of you have training in family systems or therapy or communication. Scott,
psychology, so lots of different things, and this concept of differentiation of self is a big one, and I'm just barely going to touch on it as a way to reduce stress and anxiety in our clients. And then thinking about intense listening and how we can go beyond just active listening, if you will, and address the underlying physiological stress. One of the things that I heard this morning in the panel from the journal editors was thinking about the different types of research. And it was really not that long ago that mental health diagnoses became accepted. It was in the 1950s, I'm pretty sure is the correct date, that the very first diagnostic manual came out for mental health issues. That was just barely before we were getting started with the CBT profession. And thinking about only then, not that long ago, 70 years ago, that we were finally acknowledging that there was some sort of underlying issue related to anxiety, to major depressive disorder, to PTSD, and the evolution of the mental health field is super fascinating that maybe we could get into depending on how time goes and how interested we are in that. But my point of this story is the reason why it finally started taking off in the 1950s, because prior to the 1950s, we put people in mental health institutions if there was anything off with them. This included alcoholics. We institutionalized alcoholics because they were psychotic, was the definitions that we used. And in the 1950s, and particularly in 1970s, 1980s, there started to be some collaborative research across countries. We have people from other countries here today. This interactive, collaborative research among countries is really what started changing the game in the mental health field. And the reason why is because they started collecting biological metrics of what was going on in people's lives. And it wasn't just how we think that they feel or do things, it's physiological stress, it is biology, it's the MRI scans. And this is what we need within financial planning, because we do know that from MRI scans, there are different reactions in how people interpret generosity. The research that I've done largely focuses on physiological stress, which is so easy to ascertain in clients. And quick side tour of how we do that is skin temperature. And the reason why skin temperature is such an easy, quick indicator of physiological stress is that when we go into the fight or flight response mechanism, heightened physiological stress, what's happening is that the blood is going back to our heart to prepare for that reaction, whether we're going to run away or whether we're going to fight through the situation. When that happens, the blood's going back to our heart to prepare for that physiological reaction. My hands get cold because there's more flow here than in my fingers. So right now, my fingers are like ice cubes. I don't like public speaking, and this really stresses me out. So if you were to shake my hands immediately after I'm done, you'll notice that my hands are like ice cubes. And when that's happening, you know that I feel like I'm being attacked. But maybe it's real, maybe it's not. And my brain goes into very myopic thinking. There now, I just want to get out of here, or fight through it, or run away. And this is the exact opposite place we want our clients to be. We are trying to get them to think about the long term. And if we can recognize by shaking their hand when they come into the office, if you're lucky enough to have that set up, that if they have cold hands, okay, it's winter, you can say, it's cold outside. It only takes 2 minutes to adjust to the internal temperature. So give them 2 minutes to settle down. And then shake their hand, welcome them to the appointment. If their hands are cold, less than 90 degrees, you all have thermometers at home post-COVID. What we know is that they're very now focused and they're not going to remember you. And you can tell them whatever you want to tell them, but they're going to go home and they're going to claim that you never told them that because they weren't there in that meeting with you. Their mind was off somewhere else. So it's only with that kind of research, that physiological research, with that MRI research, combined with some of this qualitative analysis, some of the really great behavioral finance research that we have, we need all of that to advance ourselves forward as a profession and get to ultimately where we need to be. And thinking about psychology of financial planning, it is more than behavioral finance. Behavioral finance is really fantastic at providing quick solutions for clients. We know that if we phrase information in certain ways, we can get clients to do certain things as a result of that, and that works really great in that moment. And then we need to take it a step further, so they start implementing it on their own. And that's really what the psychology of financial planning is about, is that interaction between what you are doing as the financial advisor and how this is having an impact on the client. It's the study of the mind. It's not treating the mind. And we kind of see that to where so far within the financial planning profession, we've largely been focused on the left side with this very quantitative approach. There are solutions, there are numbers, there are equations. We're trying to get to X, Y, Z. And now we're bringing in this other messier side of psychology and trying to understand how the mind works and how that interferes with the black and white nature of the numbers. And it starts getting trickier. And it's particularly hard because most of us were trained in problem solving. We were trained from a very quantitative background. We know what we should get to. And now you're telling me I need to know psychology. If you are a CFP professional, you now have to know psychology of financial planning. But what we also need to understand is that ology, study of the mind as it relates to how we are handling our money, is not the same as therapy. Thera means to treat. So we're not treating anything. The only thing that we want to accomplish within the systemic approach to financial planning is understanding what's going on and recognizing that those elements are at play. We don't need to fix everything that comes at us. We are simply there to guide the process, collect all of the pieces of information, and then design a plan based off of those pieces of information. We don't need to fix all of it. Ironically, within the CFP board's definition of psychology of financial planning, it's pointing towards a lot of these words, and you just read over it. This is widely available on the website, and you read over it without really putting much thought into it. But what the psychology of financial planning is more than client psychology. We're not pointing our fingers at the clients that they're doing something wrong or that this is their issue. It's not behavioral finance. We're not just providing a quick solution, potentially very helpful solution. It's really more than both of those things separately. It's the interaction of us, because we are humans with our own set of emotions and thoughts and behaviors and values and biases, and how this interacts with the client's values, behaviors, biases, behavior, ideas. And look at this. It is the system within which clients planning for their financial goals, achieving financial well-being, smartest presentations. There's so much on well-being that I'm gonna have to miss, so I'm super sad about that. But a lot, like, we're interested in well-being and the systemic interaction right here in front of us. So what does it mean, more precisely, to think about systems, and how do we shift our mind into thinking automatically first into systems? And this is what I use with students, so you can tell me what you think about it and if this particular one resonates with you. We can look at this leaf and we can describe it in so many ways. You are a little bit further away than I am on this screen, so you might be able to see some of it, maybe not. But you can see lots of different colors. You can see that's a really awful view. This monitor is much better. You can see a lot more details on this one. You can see that some animals have eaten through the leaf. There's some holes in it. You can see the different colors. You can see the veins. You can even see a cobweb, which now that I'm pointing it out over on the bottom right, you can kind of see that cobweb. So something's been crawling on it. So we can go into a lot of detail about this leaf if you want. But then once we span out a little bit and put it in context of its system, we lose total control of that leaf. We have no idea where that leaf is within the larger system. Immediately when I look at this second picture, my mind, me, I feel fairly confident the majority of you, your eyes move to the people that are right there in front of you and what's going on with them and what sort of conversation must they be having? They must be getting along if they're walking up close together. Kind of looks like they're holding their hands. They've got the umbrella, maybe it could just rain or it's gonna rain, and who cares about that one little leaf anymore, right? Like, it's lost. We don't have any idea where that leaf is in this broader picture. And it's the same thing with our clients. They walk into our office and we can tell a lot about that client. We can make a lot of assumptions and a lot of plans for that one client. But then what happens is we throw them out with their system, their family, and it can get lost. If we have not accounted for all of these other things that are at play, what happens to the plan? We see this all the time. It goes out the window because we didn't think about, if we want to go to the most extreme scenario, and I have a financial planning friend who's told me this, that's happened to him more than once, to where he finds out that there is a whole second family. Maybe he finds out by accident, maybe it comes up, it slips up, or whatever the case may be. And so we've made this beautiful plan for this person who's sitting here in front of us, and then they go home, and they haven't told you about everything else that's going on, so they never implement what's going on in this beautiful plan that you made for them, because there's a whole other system that we didn't ask about, that we didn't observe. So when we think about systems theory, what we are not doing is thinking about who is in the room. And that seems a tiny bit counterproductive until you look at the flip side. What systems thinking is thinking about who's in the room. And who's in the room, who's not in the room. So when your client shows up and they're by themselves, and you know that they're married, why is the partner not there, and what sort of impact does this have on the financial plan? We don't think about people in isolation. Even if there is just one client who comes into our office, we think about people who are a part of a larger system, this interdependence that they have. We don't talk about treating, even though I am a therapist to treat. It's not about treating people. It's about this interaction, the mutual influence that we're having. It's not about these kind of made-up interventions, these paradoxical interventions. It's understanding the logic of what appears to be illogical. It's not about maintaining objectivity. So our goal is not to necessarily determine right and wrong and black and white. It's about appreciating and recognizing the subjectivity that, yeah, this might be a good plan right now, but we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Maybe there's a car accident that totally shifts our thinking. Maybe nothing actually happened as a result of that car accident, bad-wise, but the scare of it has shifted my mindset of what could have happened. And now we need to shift the subjectivity and our analysis. So recognizing that things are quite fluid. We don't care about what caused the problem, and I think that's a really big one, right? Especially for those of us who don't want to get into the emotions. Here's the beauty of it. You don't even need to know about the past. We don't need to worry about what caused the problem to that person to where they are right now. We just need to know how that problem is being maintained right now and looking forward to solutions, so we don't need to put people down on the couch. Yes, I love that you're asking questions.
Oh, thank you. I'm curious about the degree to which the person in the room, us, how much we need to recognize our own subjectivity and how much we might have internal biases and those things, because it seems to me that so much of the problems occur because we have our idea.
You are jumping ahead like 2 slides, but I love it. Let's go there now. So the question is, the subjectivity is also us, and what biases are we bringing into the office? Actually, I have multiple slides on this that we could go into, but just jumping ahead a bit. When the financial advisor has not experienced a major loss themselves, so think about your average 22-year-old, okay? Probably experienced some bad things, some bad breakups, maybe some falling out with friends, maybe they're really close in high school, maybe they were super involved in high school and they don't really have that relationship anymore. But have they experienced true, that was unfair, have they experienced life-altering loss? Maybe. Maybe one could consider that a major loss. Have they experienced the death of a spouse? Probably not at age 22. Have they experienced the death of a parent? Maybe, sometimes, not very often. The very first loss that a lot of those 22-year-olds experience is a grandparent, and that is a big deal. And it's not as life-altering as some of these other major things that financial advisors deal with all of the time. So you're meeting this advisor, this 22-year-old is meeting with their clients, and they think they know what loss feels like, and they do to a certain degree, but they don't know what loss feels like at the degree to what the 50-year-old, the 60-year-old financial advisor does. And that's where that young planner's biases, not his fault, her fault at all, simply based off of his or her life experiences, is very much influencing the conversations that they're having, how quickly they move on from that conversation, and so forth. John Loper actually has a good story on this that he should tell later on. Oh, he was sitting over there, it's hard to see with the lights. Oh, there he is, over there. He didn't hear me. They're gonna come ask you for your story later. Tell them whatever story you want. So yes, financial planners' biases very much do influence it. I had another piece of that kind of dealt with the experiences, but I'll wait till we get to that. So yes, I think this is a big component that we need to start incorporating into our work as advisors, for those of us who are advisors, to recognize that those biases that we're bringing in, but also the academic programs who are so well represented here today. We need to start teaching advisors, students, future advisors, kind of what these interactions look like and how to recognize life experiences and impacts and their values and their biases that they're not really even maybe completely solidified on themselves, but getting them to the place to recognize that these things very much are influencing their clients. Okay, you had time to read the rest of this, so I'm going to move on so that we don't run out of time. Okay. Differentiation of self. This is a huge concept with a single slide to discuss today. It's an impossible task, but it's worth mentioning in a presentation because it is such a huge concept and one that I think you can wrap your mind around pretty quickly with some examples. So when do we have high differentiation of self? So I can set myself apart as an individual with my own thoughts, my own beliefs, my own behaviors, and I can also be part of something else. I can also be part of whatever systems at play right. And maybe this is my family of origin, the family I grew up with. Maybe this is my friend group. Maybe this is my work family. But I can see myself both as an individual and an important part of this other system. That is high differentiation of self. We also have people on the opposite end of the spectrum who have very low differentiation of self. Some of us work in colleges, and professional athletes are kind of now mimicked within the college setting, depending on what sort of school you're at and the intensity of sports. But let's think about any professional athlete that you want to. I live in Kansas, and I work at Texas Tech. It's confusing, but those are all true statements. And Patrick Mahomes, he has connections to both, right? He's a Texas Tech alum, now he's quarterback of the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes, since probably, his dad was a head coach, right? I don't know my sports history that good. Baseball coach, yeah. Okay, so more than likely, since the age of 3, Patrick Mahomes has been told when to exercise, how to hold the bat, until he learned to do football instead. And then he gets into college and he was told, you study during these hours, you eat during these hours, you eat this food that I have prepared for you, and then you practice during these hours and you sleep during these hours. Okay? Now he's playing professional ball, same thing. He's told when to exercise, when to eat, probably what to eat, when to sleep, when to travel. The whole bit's planned out for him. He doesn't need to make any decisions at all. What happens to Patrick in 20 years from now? Maybe he's a coach, maybe he's not, but all of a sudden nobody's telling him what to do, unless he's one of those Brett Favre, right? Like he still plays?
Mm-mm.
No, he's kind of retired. Yeah, we should have went down this road. Most people stop playing professional ball at a certain age, and then they're kind of lost because they don't know what to do, because they haven't established themselves as an individual. They have very low differentiation of self, and therefore, what happens is they are so dependent upon other people for every element of their life that they don't know how to manage their personal finances. They don't know how to eat healthy. They don't know how to have a balanced exercise program that they don't become so out of shape and overweight, but also they're not spending their entire days consumed in this one activity. And that's an extreme example, but we can think of plenty of examples of other people who don't have very high differentiation of self. You're probably thinking of some of the millennials. They get a bad rap, right? They don't have very high differentiation of self because the parents are so involved. And a lot of millennials, like not all the time, but there is a lot of dependency that's going on. And this makes it very hard for them to make decisions, and it makes it very hard to have some of that long-term financial behavior that we're looking for because they're not able to see themselves as an individual. The only way that we're going to be able to know a person's kind of differentiation of self, where they stand, how independent, that's not good either. You're totally independent, that you're not relying on anyone. You're not seeing them because they can do it themselves. They don't need a financial advisor. They're off doing their own thing. But we also don't want the people who are totally dependent. And we might have both of those in our office because the dependent force the independent, or whichever way around, they force each other into the session. Ultimately, we're shooting for this healthy differentiation of self, this interdependency. So, I want to tell you a story about a client, Katrina, and this is really going to drill home the idea of what it means to have systemic thinking and how this is applied in financial planning, and what the problem is when we don't think systemically, working with the client right there in front of us. Katrina is our client. She's young, she has a baby, she has another toddler, 2 very young children, and her husband has died. And so here you have Katrina, and she's in your office, and she's got this toddler, she's holding this tiny little baby, and you're having a conversation with her as the financial planner. And Katrina's come in, she's got substantial life insurance proceeds, and she's wondering, what do I do with this money? And her goal in this scenario was to give the money away. She didn't want it anymore. She wanted to get rid of the life insurance proceeds. So she was talking about some charitable giving that she wanted to do. She's talking about scholarships that she wanted to start, all of these big things. And the financial advisor was saying, let's put the money into bonds. Government bonds are doing really great right now. It's nice and safe. Like, this is just what you should be doing because it's safe, low risk. You can just leave it there and not think about it for a while. And so what happens is Katrina leaves that office and she does what she was going to do because the financial advisor wasn't listening to her and didn't hear how badly she wanted this money away. Okay, so he keeps pushing government bonds. She puts nothing in government bonds. Fast forward several years, and now Katrina she's been promoted, she's got a great income, has remarried, like, her life situation is totally different. Not a little infant anymore, like grown children, doing their own thing, and she wants to start a business. And she wants to start a business, but this requires a lot of capital. Capital that she had not that many years ago that she gave away. And while there are no regrets with giving the money away, The problem is the financial advisor wasn't listening to what her ultimate goals were. What he was listening for is, again, let's start at the bottom of this diagram. This financial advisor, he was young, and what he was thinking about instead is how his mom had just died of cancer, and how he watched his dad, who had no insurance proceeds, struggle financially. And so what he was thinking about, meeting with Katrina, who's holding this little tiny baby with another child in tow, is the financial impact he felt as a child, and wanting to make sure that those children didn't feel that way, that they were cared for. And government bonds, that's nice and safe, like that's always gonna be there, no need to worry about that. What he did not hear was Katrina wanted to give a large portion of this money to her church. The same church that was caring for her 2 little kids. And what the financial advisor didn't ask about is why she wanted to give that money, and taking that step back of what did it mean to give money to that church. So what Katrina felt like is that she had lost all of her connections. Her social network shrunk if she didn't give that money. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. But that was her philosophy. By not taking a step back and seeing all of these different components at play, by asking more of the why questions and asking openly about what were some of the longer term goals, the financial planner totally missed the mark, and the plan was never implemented. Now she's in a position to where she could have used that money. So by thinking systemically, a better option in that situation would have been for the financial planner to ask some of those how questions. Why do we want to give money to charity? What does that look like? Can we phase this in? Can we start with whatever a normal amount is, an average amount, 5%? That's a pretty standard amount of how much people give annually. What if we give 5% to XYZ this year, and then let's develop a plan right now, and then let's develop a plan to start giving more over time? And this would have allowed some of that conversation to develop. Maybe she didn't want to talk about some of the how and the why questions right then, and that's okay. But allowing some of that time and taking the step back to gather more information is part of the systemic thinking, and this does not require you being a therapist in any way. This requires us to think therapeutically and to start asking some of those open-ended questions. When we don't ask some of those open-ended questions, we just want to get to the solution. We don't want to go through the process. What happens is we miss information. And we miss some of those family alliances, the circular process that's at play. The big thing with therapy that can be applied in all areas of life is it's not about the content, it's about the process. Very little of what happens in life is about the words that's being said. It's about how we're saying the words, how we're showing up. Not a single person has drifted off. That is something I look for. It's not necessarily what you're saying back to me, but I'm looking, how are you receiving this information? Are you engaged? Are you looking at your phone? I'm imagining the stories of what must be going on for you. I might be wrong, but at least I'm imagining the other things that are going on for your lives. And when I do see people who are on their phones or their computers or whatnot, I immediately go into, oh, they're bored, they don't care. But also, maybe they just got a call from their school and there's an emergency that they need to take care of, or maybe a client called and they need to take care of that. So imagining these multiple scenarios to a situation is really what this therapeutic communication is all about. And there's evidence that this works. This happens to be in a study about diabetics and managing symptoms of diabetics like blood pressure, weight, other sorts of metrics. And what they found in this study was that it was the combination of things, and I put the one in bold because this one had the biggest impact on people's ability to manage outcomes, was interactive messaging or interactive support groups, or the systemic involvement of other people in similar situations. But it was the combination of all of these that made an impact far superior than a do-it-yourself approach, and far superior than any one of these elements by themselves. So think about what, if you're a financial advisor, how we typically give information to clients. I would say it's very high on the first several things. We like to give them information. Here, go read this article. Here's my newsletter. Here's all this really great stuff for you to go read. Here's this nice plan. It's very beautiful, lots of charts. Go do this plan. We might even offer lectures like a seminar series, webinars, podcasts, and we do some office visits. But the thing that matters the most is the thing that we typically don't offer to clients in terms of behavioral change, and that's that interactive support group with one another. This is the point I was trying to get to earlier with what this looks like from a data ways. This is data that Northwestern collected over the last several months. And what we saw is that by age groups, you can see very quickly and very easily the difference in people's exposure to loss. So we asked them, has this thing happened to you? This were things like divorce, death of someone in the household, foreclosure, job loss, on and on. You can see the things that happen to them personally versus their family in the yellow. And then whether or not that same thing that happened to them also happened to somebody they knew. And it jumps massively from that early group, so our early financial advisors, to the people in maybe their mid-career to late career. And this matters in a lot of ways because there is limited evidence that people who have experienced loss react to risky situations differently. And this study I loved, and my husband walked by. He's very risk averse. He walked by as I was making this slide, and I had to write it down myself when I was going to tell you this. His exact words were when he walked by, so because you invest in risky assets, you get moderate PTSD. Thanks for laughing, because I thought it was hilarious. But he was being totally serious for the most part. But it's this idea of risk aversion and where people are at on that. But this particular study was looking at people who had, I think it was diagnosable PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And if they were at a moderate level, so maybe they were in a car accident and they get really nervous when they're going on long trips because they have some moderate PTSD. We see that the moderate levels of PTSD, they were actually more willing to engage, to invest in risky assets. That's kind of fascinating, right? So a little bit of stress, anxiety, PTSD, I'm more willing to take some risk. But if I have high PTSD, so maybe think about a war veteran, they've had a lot of things going on in their lives. What we see for them is they are way less likely to invest in risky assets. So maybe there's some sort of middle ground that we're looking for in terms of people's exposures and what that looks like. I'm being cognizant of time. I will not run into our time, probably. And okay, so let's think about how this looks with integrating some of these psychological concepts into practice. And is this really impacting your clients? Do we need to be worried about PTSD? Do we need to be worried about trauma, other things that might be going on with their client? Here's the reality. This is data that's been collected by the CDC, and they had been following people for a long time. But once COVID hit, they started tracking people's responses to anxiety and depressive symptoms every 2 weeks. And what we found was that pre-COVID, this was in 2019, 1 in 12 people that they surveyed experienced symptoms of anxiety. Like I said, they've been collecting it every 2 weeks. So this is recent data. I actually pulled it in October. My father pulled it in right before. But we can say that October is pretty close to December. What do you think it is now? How many Americans experience symptoms of anxiety? Was 1 in 12, now it's 5 in 12? That's a confusing ratio. How about 1 in? 1 in 5. I love that. So close. 1 in 4. About 25% of people. Is that what?
Wow.
I can't do that kind of math calculation in my head. So we'll go with 1 in 4. now experience symptoms of anxiety. Every 4 people that walk into your office, look around at your table, you have approximately 4 to 5 people. Probably one of you at your table has experienced symptoms of anxiety within the last 2 weeks. Doesn't mean that you have generalized anxiety disorder, just that you are experiencing these symptoms that look like an anxiety disorder. Depressive symptoms. Pre-COVID, 1 in 17. Now? 1 in 6, so close. This one's the 1 in 5. But again, look at your table. You might have to go to 2 tables for this. Probably one of you has experienced symptoms of depression. Does not mean that you are depressed or that you have major depressive disorder. It just means that you've experienced some of these symptoms that could indicate depression and depressive symptoms. And this is important because our clients are dealing with this. And either we're willing to recognize it or we're not. At ratios this high, for sure some of your clients are dealing with a lot. And people have a lot going on all the time. On average, we experience a new stressor every 7 minutes. You've been such an attentive audience, so you don't even know what stressors you are waiting for you when you pick up your phone. But they're there. And it's how we interpret these stressors. And I mean, even just the stressors of the door opening and shutting, that could be a major stressor for someone with PTSD and who's had that experience in their life, and not being able to see the door behind you. So I mean, we all experience different types of stressors and being willing to acknowledge that. So if people are dealing with symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of depression, they're experiencing a new stressor every 7 minutes, what can we reasonably expect them to do and actually implement? We're always trying to get back to this steady spot. Who we are now is who we're always trying to get back to. We can try to change. People change, Steve told me right before we came on. We do change, but ultimately we come back to the same person that we are. This is how we're programmed as people. We're trying to reach this homeostasis. So how much change can we introduce to maybe shift that middle ground a little bit to a more desirable place for them? This was a study, I think it was in the Netherlands, somewhere in Europe. I know I'm about out of time. I'm getting there. A study in Europe, and they were looking at this huge office building, and what happened, everyone has thermostats in their office, okay? In this large building. And what they tried to do in this large building is reduce the overall temperature by 1 degree. And what they saw, and everybody could change their own temperature. This was during the winter, and they could change their temperature if they so desired. When they reduced the temperature by 1 degree, what we saw is that the office temperature decreased by 0.38 degrees. So not a lot, but it changed a little bit. So maybe people are adjusting to a certain degree. Then they said, well, what happens if we reduce the office temperature by 3 degrees? There was no change in the office temperature. While it's not statistically significant, I'm pretty sure that the temperature actually increased in the individual offices, so people were overcompensating by changing their thermostat in their office to make it even warmer. And why does this happen? Because the 1 degree, they were able to maintain that. It was not where I started, but I'm generally willing to accept this as a reasonable change. And 3 degrees, no thank you, I'm not going to do that. So when we're making these plans for clients, what is that happy middle ground of, let's make this recommendation, what's the minimum change that we can implement right now to have a lasting impact on this client, and what's the maximum change that they will endure? 1 to 3 degrees is not a very large amount that they're dealing with, but had a massive impact in terms of what happened in that individual office. Okay, so finally, looking forward, I talk about this in nearly every presentation I do because I strongly believe this, and I think it's where we're going. We used to be very much focused on the advisor goals. I put it in air quotes, advisor goals, because we were focused on sales. We were cold calling people, and it was working great, right? Like we were getting mid income, It's wonderful. And then we're like, that's kind of crazy. We should maybe put the client first and think about what sort of goals they have versus just selling them whatever thing we think is the thing we should sell them. But I think that's the past. Right now, the future is already here, and clients want to talk about well-being. Look at the program for tomorrow. I had no idea that the program would have so many things on well-being. When I put this up here, our presentation that is immediately after this, there is no break, so stay in your seats because it's a fascinating subject of the client impact study. We're now focused on clients want to talk about well-being. They want to talk about how their finances are related to their relationships, how their finances are related to their physical health, their mental health. So I think we're there already. How we get there, same definition as before, it's the system, that interaction between us and the clients. We need more experiential training and supervision. Very common, I've called you out multiple times, Megan, here she is, in real life. It's very common in therapy, it's required actually in therapy, that when you are training to become a therapist, if somebody is actively supervising you, they are watching what you're doing and they're critiquing you. Not to be mean, but to be helpful, and it's the constructive feedback, and we don't do that. Sure, people go on internships, but there's not that engagement between someone who's experienced great loss and the brand new advisor who is still learning a lot about him or herself and life in general. So we need to have some more of that mentorship, that hands-on experiential learning, an adapted approach with the research that we've been talking about this morning so far, and also more of the direct communication. Make the covert overt. Make what's not being said said. And this really helps me in my clever little way think about the new direction of the RIA. We need to focus on relationships first, and we talk about that all the time, but for me, this is what that means, and building rapport and understanding the presenting issue, which is kind of an interesting word, a different word to think about, but it's this idea of really understanding what's at play. Maybe they say that they want to retire because that's something we're told we should do, is plan for retirement. But is that really the issue that they're there and they want to talk about in that moment? So really getting at the heart of what it means for them to have this money and how they want to use that money. And then, of course, we need to think about it. Maybe there is, if we start asking some of these questions, people always say, well, it could bring up something else. It's true, it might. And we can handle that referral just like we handle every other type of referral that we give. We don't need to make it weird. By us making it weird, it makes it weird for the clients. So let's treat it like a referral, just like we would for tax. We're not getting rid of the clients, sending them to an accountant. We are incorporating that as part of our services. Same thing for mental health training or a mental health referral. Insight, really getting down to some of those systemic patterns. I've seen some of what firms offer. Northwestern has a really great discovery process that really gets into some of these systemic relationships. I'm sure you all have one as well, but really we're trying to figure out these connections to other people's life, thinking about the case of Katrina and why was it that she wanted to get rid of the money? Does she feel regret from it? Was there this other support system? And really trying to pull out some of those relationships. And then finally, getting at the action component, which is right now where we tend to jump to first. To do all of this, unfortunately, requires us to take a look at ourselves, looking at both sides of the mirror, and not just putting this as something for the client to take care of, but something that we can maybe even fix or help the client fix, but looking at ourselves and what are we bringing into this room, in this space. If I just had an argument with my spouse, how is that showing up with the couple that I'm meeting with, and who am I agreeing with in that moment, in that space, and does it have anything to do with what the client needs or wants, or is this more about me and the argument I just had with my partner? And then thinking about how well I'm differentiated with my family. So how am I able to identify these relationships and what I expect of my parents or my children, and also my practice. You see this all of the time, especially right now with the transfer of ownership to maybe the next generation. And can your